This is a Media Lab podcast. Welcome to Putting It Together, the podcast that goes through the entire body of work of Stephen Sondheim, show by show and song by song. My name is Kyle Marshall, your self-described Sondheim expert. And today, we have a big episode planned because we're going to go through majority the Tim Burton version of Sweeney Todd that was adapted in 2007, but kind of the history of Sweeney Todd on film. And to help me, I've invited back Luke Crichton.
Hello. Lovely to be back, Kyle.
Welcome back, Luke. Thank you so much.
Such a joy to be back again.
You know, we've already been talking for a few minutes here kind of about this movie, but also like film in general, that sort of thing. Before we jump into talking about Sweeney Todd in general, I'd love to know, like, do you have any early memories of getting into movies?
Well, okay. I'm a film graduate. That happened a few years ago. Currently, I write music for short films and things when I can. I'm currently finishing up work on a small independent feature among a few, and I'm doing a play as well at the moment, which is great. Movies were kind of a big thing for me as a kid. I saw, I suppose sort of run-of-the-mill kind of things. Episode 4 was like a big movie for me, Star Wars Episode 4, but also Mary Poppins was on anytime I was ill. I love that movie with all my heart. The Mummy with Brendan Fraser, amazing movie, 5 stars, so good. And then musicals were also a big one. So The Wizard of Oz, loved The Wizard of Oz so much. Couldn't quite believe, the moment when she steps into Technicolor. Could not fathom how they did it, but just blew my mind as a kid. On the Town with Gene Kelly, and then Little Shop of Horrors with Rick Moranis. And then finding out about all the behind the scenes and everything. Oh, and also Lord of the Rings. That was kind of my intro to the bonus features of everything and finding out how they really made movies, which really got me into kind of learning about film and film scoring. And there's a bunch of other things I'm missing currently, but that was kind of my in.
I really do admit, it's not that they don't exist anymore, but in a streaming universe, it is sometimes too bad that I don't get as many bonus features in my life as when I was actually collecting a lot more DVDs, Blu-rays, that sort of thing.
Sometimes I would watch the bonus features more than the actual movie, and that goes for a lot of films that perhaps aren't the best. Yet the bonus features are just so interesting, which is why I suppose we'll get to it. But it's why Sweeney didn't really frighten me in terms of the blood when I eventually saw it, because I was like, oh, I know how they did this. They had a fake neck and they had all the blood pumping through, and
a little squib or something
so
like
brilliant.
That. Spurts blood.
Got into movies very young. Thank you, Mum. Thanks for that. And completely fell in love with movies, and by extension kind of studied film because I wanted to direct, and then realized that I wanted to score every single film that everyone else was making, which then led me to realize I want to do film scoring. And that's kind of where we are now.
You're kind of speaking my language. It's interesting that you bring up Wizard of Oz, because that is also kind of a seminal movie in my life. I actually just for the very first time watched Oz the Great and Powerful here a couple of days ago, which was awful. And I was remarking about it to someone else. I'm like, that moment where Dorothy goes out of her door and you're in Technicolor? That single moment is more awe-inspiring than anything that happens in this over 2 hour long film.
It's such a shame.
It is remarkable.
Sam Raimi really it's a Sam Raimi movie. It should be good. I will say though,
it would work,
for its faults, I love Elfman's score. Learning about Elfman and John Williams and certain other composers led me to the directors they work with, which then led me to Tim Burton, and the rest is history. Yeah, Oz Great and Powerful, not amazing, but I think the production design is really good.
Before we get too far into the weeds of other films, we should probably talk a little bit about the history of Sweeney Todd, because for sure we're talking about the Sweeney Todd musical here this season, but Sweeney Todd as a figure, a legend, if you want to call him that, has been adapted into film since the silent era of filmmaking. There is a long history of Sweeney Todd being adapted. One thing I didn't ask you the last time you were on, do you have any history with the Sweeney Todd, Penny Dreadful, the myth, the legend? Is that a bigger thing over in the UK than it is over here?
Not really, or not for me at least. I only knew about Sweeney Todd through the film. So there was no real discussion of he wasn't really a boogeyman in terms of other famous kind of horror characters. I think we learned about Jack the Ripper at school, but we never really spoke about Sweeney Todd. It wasn't until, the film came out that everybody started talking about it. So is it like I mean, because you studied English literature, didn't you? Was that a section? Did you study it at all? Or?
No, not at all. That's what I mean. Like Sweeney Todd was only, in my world, my only experience with it was the Sondheim musical. It wasn't actually until much later, after listening to a score for a while, and I did going online and reading up about it, that I even knew it was based on like a story, or not a real person, but like a fake story that people have been to scare people, sort of thing.
The interesting thing about Sweeney Todd, though, is that Sweeney is technically based on another sort of villain of literature called Sawney Bean, who was a cannibal at the time. I think James I was king, and he lived up in Leith in Scotland. And I've got here some quotes about him. But his family consisted of 8 sons, 6 daughters, 18 grandsons, and 14 granddaughters, who were all begotten in incest, which is nice. His real name was Alexander.
Great family reunions. It's a fun time.
Oh, solid. Yeah. I mean, yeah, some would argue the greatest family reunion is incest.
Yeah. That family tree is a stick. Yeah.
Yeah. But what's interesting, though, is that Sawney Bean Sweeney was inspired by Sawney Bean, but both Sawney Bean and Sweeney Todd are both from the Newgate calendar, where Sweeney Todd originates. So he's based off another fictional character, technically.
Right. And yes, I was even reading somewhere, this was at the beginning of this season, some people even think that there's maybe some adaptation working with this other figure. I think it was I want to say in France or something somewhere, who was like luring people in, stealing their money, and then baking them into pies. But that's never been verified that actually happened. There's like a story people were making up. So it might be just a combination of a few different things that are being kind of mashed together. It's
interesting to see how that kind of trickled down into the musical, though, that we've eventually got, because there's a lot of that, for example, like he's described as a wild barbarian character, this Sawney Bean, probably to stir up stereotypes about the Scots. This was created by the English, of course. Right. They were like, oh, those damn Scots. But a wild barbarian kind of character. And I know in one of the other Penny Dreadful, he's described with like this massive like hair where he keeps his combs and his brushes in it.
That's right.
Which I don't know, might have been inspired by that.
The characterization of Sweeney Todd in the stories, and then eventually into that Penny Dreadful that was published, is that he is very clearly a villain. I don't know how much I really underscored it through this season, but just to make a fine point on it, the Christopher Bond play really updated the characterization to be, I think, much more meaningful to a modern audience, much more empathetic. Oh, yeah. Sweeney Todd becomes much more empathetic because he is straight up the villain in the piece. He is bloodthirsty, and really he wants gold. Like he wants money from people. That is what he's luring people in, killing them, stealing their money, so he can continue on with it. Like that is what the whole story is about. And even the Mrs. Lovett character is there, but not as conniving. It's almost like under duress is being brought into these schemes. And then Joanna, of course, is not actually his daughter in any of that source material.
No, that's what really surprised me when I saw the 36 film with Todd Slaughter, is that her name's Joanna Oakley, and Sweeney's swindling money from her. She's got a lover called Mark, not Anthony.
Right, I know.
I thought it was quite something.
And who is going to fall in love with someone named Mark?
Exactly.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Sorry to all the Marks out there.
The first time Sweeney Todd is adapted that I can find, at least, is this silent film from 1926 directed by George Dewhurst, and then starring a man named G.A. Bond. I use a service called Letterboxd. Apparently, 2 people have watched this film on this service. I couldn't find a copy of this anywhere. Okay. I could not find anywhere online that I could view this. However, 2 years later, in 1928, there was another movie called Sweeney Todd, directed by Walter West. It stars Moore Marriott. I am one of 27 people who have watched this movie. It's on YouTube. You can literally watch it on YouTube. And it's not the best transfer in the world. To me, what it looks like is someone is projecting it on a wall and then filming it with their phone.
Oh, okay.
And that is the transfer that is on YouTube. So it's like not the best video experience. It's also literally completely silent. There is no sound, no music, no nothing. So it's just a silent film that you were watching. What is fascinating to me, this is going to be a recurring theme, is this like framing device that seems to happen in every single Sweeney Todd adaptation, even in the musical, right? Where we have attend the tale. They're like the ghosts rising up and say, you're about to watch a story, and then we get into the actual plot. In this one, hopefully I'm not mistaking this with the Todd Slaughter one. In this one, it's a guy having dinner with, I think, his daughter, and he falls asleep and then dreams.
Oh, wow, okay.
The Sweeney Todd story.
Okay.
And then is woken up by his daughter just as things are getting like at their worst. He's like, oh my God, I thought Sweeney Todd was after me. And then they like have a dinner together. I'm like, this is weird.
Right.
There's this weird framing device. In my opinion, people are free to go and watch this if they want to and rebut me. Like it's fine as like a silent film. It didn't really do anything I think amazing with the adaptation, but the chair is fun to watch. It's literally sits in it, like flips around just like you see on most of the other ones. Mm-hmm. So there's some cool set design, that sort of thing. However, we both have actually watched the next version, the 1936?
36 one, yeah.
The 1936 version, which is called Sweeney Todd, The Demon Barber of Fleet Street. So kind of the first time that full title is used, at least in a film adaptation, directed by George King and starring Todd Slaughter. For those who may not know, Todd Slaughter holds a record for portraying Sweeney Todd on stage the most times out of any single person ever. He was in a bunch of different productions that ran for years and years and years, apparently. I think he also did a bunch of other films, but I don't know if any of those survive, is the unfortunate thing.
Not a single customer today. I pine for something exciting to happen. So I'll just put a beautiful edge on my beautiful razor in case someone happens to come in. I'll soon polish you off.
Anyways, what were your thoughts on this one?
Well, I just quickly had to look up what his real name was, because he actually changed his name to Todd Slaughter.
It actually was Mark, was actually his real name.
Well, that's good. I think I've got here his first name was Norman Carter Slaughter. Todd rings better. I think it sounds a lot better.
Yeah, it does. Than Norman, yeah.
So the 1936 film, there are elements from the Penny Dreadful here, like Toby being sent out on errands. Mm-hmm. We've got the barber chair, Mrs. Lovett. We've got Joanna, Joanna Oakley and her lover, Mark, which does, some of that carries into the musical. What is interesting, though, is, at least to me, is that Sweeney doesn't actually use his razor to kill anyone. He uses his barber's chair.
Right. He flips around, they break their neck, and he goes down.
Yeah, which is great. And I really love the production design in the film of the barber's chair flipping over. That's really nicely done. The film itself it's fine. It reminds me a great deal of the Bela Lugosi Dracula movie in terms of the way it's shot. It's filmed like a stage play, but also like the Lugosi film, our villain is very memorable. I think Todd Slaughter is brilliant. He cuts a very kind of menacing figure, but he is not in any sense of the word subtle. He laughs throughout this movie.
Over the top. Like,
but it is quite brilliant, though. It's really fun to see him have a great time.
And then this is the one that it also has a framing device, because it starts off in, like, I guess present day 1930s or no. Whatever.
Yes, I think London 1930 something.
Yeah, 1930. They're coming into the barber's like, did you know that Sweeney Todd used to do his business from here? And they're like shaving the guy and everything. And then they start the story, and then we go into the Sweeney Todd tale. So it's interesting that like almost like everything I've watched, there always is a framing device that's like, by the way, we're just talking about a story. This isn't a real thing that's going on. I like
the framing device in this, because there's something else that is then later used in our musical. I think some of the first lines of the movie is, this man comes into the barber shop and he's going to be shaved. Before we have the moment of the guy going, Sweeney Todd, he was famous. We have him offering this man hair tonic, and he's like, tonic, no thanks. And he smells it and he's like, oh, that smells a bit. Just interesting how that kind of might carry on. Like, that could just be a coincidence.
Could be, but like that's actually the part of the puzzle that's missing for me. And maybe someone has some resources that they can send in. I want to know how Christopher Bond went about adapting it into his play.
Yeah.
Like, was he watching these movies and taking a bunch of them and like making up a new story? Why did he want to kind of change some of the characters around and make Joanna be his daughter? Make Toby Something with Pirelli, and like they come in and he's not just there from the very beginning. It's just a really fascinating way that he takes these core elements from all the source material, but then makes something very new with these characters.
I might be mincing my words here, no pun intended. He took elements from The Count of Monte Cristo and incorporated that.
You're right.
Which is very interesting. And to go on a very small tangent, the musical The Count of Monte Cristo by Frank Wildhorn, he's a very interesting figure. But there's a song in there in which two men discuss women, and it's called Our Women. And the similarities here between Pretty Women, and it came on my shuffle once, it was Our Women and then Pretty Women. Surely they must have known.
Our women, elusive and secret, like magic. See their hands as lithe as willows, gesturing at stars and setting tables. Buried in their hair lies the intoxicating fragrance of romance.
See the way their eyes will dance like moonlight on a lake.
Feel the way a giddy breeze will flutter in their wake. It's more than any man can take.
Our women, skin as smooth as satin sheets. And
my favorite line in the movie is a line from Todd. He's talking to Mark, who is currently in disguise. He's Joanna's lover, who's in disguise to try and trick Sweeney and find out what he's up to. He's got this beard on, this fake beard. And Todd says, a beard is an unnecessary appendage. And I just think that was wonderful. That was a great little line.
That's fun.
But yeah, it was fine.
I'm probably never going to return back to this one. And I do enjoy a lot of older black and white films. This probably is not one that I would come back to.
No.
As far as other adaptations, like there are a bunch of filmed play versions that have been brought out. Like there's this 1970 Sweeney Todd that was, I believe, aired on the BBC. It was based on a different play called Sweeney Todd. Like it has nothing to do with what we're talking about here. But 1973 has an adaptation that appeared on CBC television. That's the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. So there is a Canadian version out there, but again, based on a different version of the play. There is a 1998 version called The Tale of Sweeney Todd, which I really want to track down because it's directed by this guy named John Schlesinger, who did like Midnight Cowboy, Marathon Man, cool. A couple other ones. Oh, Sunday Bloody Sunday, if no one's seen that movie, which is, I think, really good. And I'm like, I really want to check this out and see what it is. Because I think that's the one. Let me just double check here. Yes. So Ben Kingsley is Sweeney Todd in that version. So I'd like to check that out.
That would be perfect. Ben Kingsley's wonderful. Not only is he a great actor, but he can chew scenery when he wants to.
Oh, yeah. He can be hammy if he needs to be, or like very reserved, depending on what's needed. And lastly, there's this 2006 version of Sweeney Todd, another BBC adaptation, but it's going back again to the Penny Dreadful version of the tale. It's nothing to do with the musical or anything like that at all. So, as I said, there's been tons of different adaptations of this source material. But as far as the musical goes, and like there's countless versions of those that you can watch too, from the original Broadway cast to like the Philharmonic to like one-off productions of Sweeney Todd. A lot of film versions of Sweeney Todd.
Yeah, loads.
But as far as the Sondheim, Hugh Wheeler kind of collaboration here, do you know when this was started as an idea to adapt into a film?
From the research I did, from at least looking from the perspective of Tim Burton, apparently Tim Burton saw the production in London in 1981, saw it about 10 times. I have that on record from that 1994 interview Sondheim did with Mark Horowitz. And we've got here, and I quote, "The rights were with Columbia at that point. Burton still wants to do it, though I hear he's directing Superman 12. This being Superman Lives featuring Nicolas Cage, which I think was
canned.
never
happened. But
shame. That would have
I
been
like
something.
That dig though. It's like whatever. The next Superman that they keep pumping out.
There's a lot of radio silence. Burton's career then takes off in the 1980s. Meanwhile, Sam Mendes was attached for a time. Perhaps.
Yeah, by the sounds of it, like that is really what kickstarted the movie being made eventually in 2007. Is that Sam Mendes, obviously familiar with Sondheim's work, had done Company by this time.
I think so.
Definitely would have.
That was at the Donmar, wasn't it?
Yeah. Donmar. And then, God, he did another Sondheim production. Now I'm blanking on which one he did. Anyways, he's the one who brings the screenwriter, who is
John Logan.
John Logan,
yeah.
John Logan, who comes and writes an adaptation, and they're kind of partway through it as being, it's going to be directed by Sam Mendes, written by John Logan. And then I think eventually it just falls through because, as movies do, like things take a while and people get bored and they go off to do new projects. And I don't know what Sam Mendes went off to do, actually, to be honest with you.
He directed, I think he went and did Jarhead in 2005.
That is what it is. Yes, he went and did the war movie with Jake Gyllenhaal. That's right. Interesting,
the kind of 6 degrees of Sondheim, because Jake Gyllenhaal features in that film and then ended up in Sunday. I wonder though if the idea of doing Sweeney was also discussed when Sam Mendes was involved with Wise Guys /Bounce /Roadshow.
Right.
Because I think he was one of the directors tasked to kind of rearrange Roadshow and make it become, sort of fix it. He was one of the many directors who tried to fix it. But yeah, eventually that filters out. Burton then decides, okay,
now is the time.
Let's make the movie. And 2007, the movie comes out.
Hey everyone, just Kyle breaking into the conversation here to tell you about some of the people and organizations that help this show continue to go. Of course, if you'd like to help support the show for absolutely free, you can give a rating and review on whatever app you listen to podcasts in. That's, of course, greatly appreciated. And if you'd like to help monetarily, which will only help to grow and make the show better, you can do so over at our Patreon page. Please do not donate if it impacts you negatively financially. I also need to give a huge thank you to the God That's Good tier from Patreon of Jack, Todd, Carrie, Louise, Christopher, and Steven. I almost forgot this, but thank you so much to our new patron that started here this week of Lee. So thank you so much for joining us here, Lee. Putting together as a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, locally grown, community supported, the Alberta Podcast Network promotes and supports Alberta-made podcasts and connects their audiences with Alberta-based businesses and organizations. This episode of Putting It Together is brought to you by Alberta Blue Cross. Life as a business owner can be hectic, to say the least. Alberta Blue Cross understands that, and they offer flexible health, dental, life, and disability coverage for your employees. Even better, you can let your staff enroll and manage their coverage at any time and on any device. That makes life easier for them and for you. You've got this when it comes to group coverage for your small business, and Alberta Blue Cross has got your back. To learn more and explore your options, head on over to ab.bluecross.ca. This episode is also brought to you by the Edmonton Community Foundation. The foundation acts as a bridge between donors and charities to create a strong, vibrant community for generations to come. You can start an endowment fund yourself or with a group. Once it reaches $10,000, it can start distributing funds. Vital Signs is an annual checkup conducted by Edmonton Community Foundation in partnership with Edmonton Social Planning Council to measure how the community is doing. This year's focus is on making ends meet in Edmonton. If you want to learn more, go on over to ecfoundation.org. First, before we maybe get into even our thoughts of the movie itself, because I definitely have thoughts, you'll have thoughts. Anytime you are adapting something into a movie medium, obviously there's things that need to be changed, slightly updated or like modified just to make more sense. So I think maybe we should just go through a list of things that are maybe the obvious ones that have been changed and maybe some not so obvious things that have been changed as far as the adaptation goes. I'll start. I think the biggest thing, and I've heard this both as a positive and a negative, the first thing people will say that's different is that you do not get any of the ballads of Sweeney Todd in the movie version. Although those were filmed.
Apparently Christopher Lee was singing some of them. Where is that footage? That would be amazing.
Be somewhere, right? It has to be somewhere if they actually filmed it.
Yeah.
Because I want to even say that Christopher Lee is credited and like he's in the credits, but you don't actually ever see him in the movie. I know. That could be made up by me, but he definitely was there. It's also why oh my gosh, what's his name?
Anthony Head.
Anthony Head shows up for like 5 seconds.
He does.
Because he was part of the chorus.
I really like that though, because I know that there's been a lot of kind of discussion, and I've listened to several different podcasts discussing kind of whether the ballads should be there. And I do think that they are kind of unnecessary because I think Sondheim was approached by Burton to do with this, and Sondheim, I think, said, why are you cutting the ballads? And Burton said, well, it's Attend the Tale of Sweeney Todd. We're going to attend the tale. We're going to watch the movie, so we may as well just get on with it.
Right.
Although apparently there's another thing that they were going to include. Depp and Carter were going to sing to each other at one point, but one of Depp's children was ill, so they had to be delayed, and that's why he couldn't do it. That was something that I found out. I would say, we don't really need the ballads. I would argue that a lot of the cut songs are for the better.
I agree. I think for the majority of the ballads, they do not need them in a film because we just need to keep moving along. Yeah. It would just feel like you're stopping the movie dead to once again tell us, like, yes, I get it. Yeah. I just watched what you told me. We don't need to do a scene change in the background, which is also what they kind of serve in the actual musical itself. Yeah. I will say, to offer a slight different perspective, I think in a perfect world, I would still prefer the very first one to show up. Just to introduce the movie. You could even do it as if, like, with all these other movie framing devices where you're either in a movie or an actual theater or something like that. And it's like, hey, we're about to do a tale here for you. And then we go into the movie proper.
There's that sequence where we're going around London, like, very quickly. That could have been done then, like, zooming around all these characters, attend the tale, and we go to different people. Sorry, I cut you off.
Yeah, something like that. There's this something to introduce us to the movie. And then, just use that musical cue throughout the movie. It only needs to be a couple seconds as we're doing like a transition into the next scene, like dun 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 dun, dun and then we're off into the next thing. But by and large, I don't honestly really miss the ballads not being in the movie.
I agree. It would be there's a universe out there where the film starts with that whistle that audience is completely unaware, and all of a sudden we hear that, and then. Can you imagine that in a cinema? That would have just blown the heads off of all the old people. That would be great.
All this like grabbing their heads and stuff like that,
like scanners, just like it'd be great.
Your heads just explode.
Most of it is more or less like there. A lot of book scenes have been moved around, and certain pieces of dialogue have been moved around, which I quite like. Honestly, I suppose one of the big changes, not in terms of book scene, but in terms of character, is that Mrs. Lovett is presented as much more of a maternal figure to Toby than she ever is in the show. This only really being from, I suppose we're looking at like Lansbury and Lapone and perhaps Emma Thompson as well. In the film, we're really kind of brought in to care about the kind of the life that maybe Mrs. Lovett could get, by the sea with Toby and Sweeney, which is a hilarious sequence. I think that's brilliantly filmed. The other thing that we've kind of got changed is at the very beginning of the film, they're talking about the wallpaper and they're talking about the harmonium. And she says, we managed to save it. It was only partially singed when the chapel burnt down. And I believe that scene is actually a lot later on in the show, but in the movie, they have it right at the beginning. They have that as just a throwaway piece of dialogue that she says, which I think is great. At the very beginning, Todd says to Anthony, I will not forget the good ship Bountiful, nor the young man who saved my life. We don't have that, but the Bountiful is mentioned when Anthony goes to see Judge Turpin, and he says, you're a sailor. And he says, yes, the Bountiful out of Plymouth. So it is name dropped there. But that's why I think John Logan's script is pretty good on the most part. We kind of get the whole story, but we get it focused to just being about Sweeney. One thing I read that they mentioned, I think it's Tim Burton talking about it, a lot of different narrative threads go through the story. We've got kind of Pirelli, we've got Joanna and Anthony, we've got the beggar woman, and we have Sweeney and Mrs. Lovett and their eventual plan. And I think what the film does very well is focus in on the Sweeney Todd aspect. We focus on him and Benjamin Barker and his end goal, rather than having, I think that's probably why the ballads aren't there, is because it almost takes away the idea that we're like right there with Sweeney. We're kind of, we're walking the same streets as him. We're in the sequences with him, like in Epiphany where he's running around. I think in an ideal world, maybe the ballads could be done, but I think it works.
I will say too, just again, as a case of adaptation, I love that Epiphany scene. I think it's probably maybe the strongest thing that they do in that visual medium of him just literally going around and being like, you're going to die, you're going to die, you're going to die. And they're kind of like these statues as he's kind of walking around the streets of London. I think that's just done so effectively.
It's a great translation of in the show when he's pointing at the audience. Instead, he's pointing at all these people in the streets.
Not super big changes, but some of the other changes that have happened are either removing songs completely or compressing them down, right? And I think that there's some trade-offs that have to happen there. Like instinctively and intuitively, I understand why you need to compress A Little Priest, right? It's in a theater context, you're about to go to intermission, so you're going to have a bit of time to like, oh, wasn't that a funny song to end off with? And I'm enticed to come back into Act 2. But when you really look at the song, it's really just a bunch of jokes over and over and over again.
Yes.
That don't really progress the plot all that much.
No.
The unfortunate part is that they do cut some of my favorite lines of the show.
Yeah.
Because of that.
I'm definitely in that camp, yeah.
Same thing with By the Sea. They cut my favorite line from that song too, which is every now and then you can do the guest in.
Yeah, that's great.
Which I think ties into your maternal thing. I think they really are trying to thread that needle in the movie. She's way nicer. She's nicer. Yes, she's culpable, but she's not as conniving as, say, the Lansbury version of Mrs. Lovett was, or some of the other versions that we've seen. She's a little bit more, it's like, I'm lovesick and I did something bad. It's not like, no, I knew what I was doing and I meant to do this and I'm so much more involved in these crimes.
It seemed, it's more of a, these are now crimes of passion, like love for Sweeney. It is a shame because especially in A Little Priest, my favorite line in that is, then again, there's Sweep if you want it cheap and you like it dark. Try the financier, peak of his career. That looks pretty rank. Well, he drank. It's a bank cashier. That gets me every time. And it is a shame they cut it, but I get why, because they have to go through, we have to translate a lot of that kind of visual imagery of like, oh, what about this person? What about that person?
I will say there, in the episode we did on A Little Priest, I actually do agree. It is interesting in the movie that Burton decides to do it where they just stay in the shop and observe people walking past the window.
Yeah.
Where it would make more sense to kind of, they're coming off of Epiphany where he's in the streets. It's like, why not have them be walking through the streets and picking out people?
Oh, yeah, like waltzing through the streets. That would have been great, yeah.
I think that would have been much more visually interesting than them just looking out the window and pointing out at people.
Again, I think it's that in a likely universe, we've got that movie. We've also got the movie where we have parlor songs in it. And I think that's a movie, that's a world I want to be in. I love parlor songs. That's an underrated
gem. But the full version of parlor songs. We're not cutting that at all. Not
all
one
12
line.
bells. I want all 12 of them.
That's right.
What is interesting about the Tower of Bray thing is that 12 people are killed in the movie. And there are 12 bells that ring in the Tower of Bray. So maybe there's something to look into there, but I digress.
The other thing I will say, and I flip-flop on this a little bit, because of how the movie is structured, I don't feel that it's as big of a shock that Lucy is Sweeney Todd's wife.
No.
Because you can kind of tell that that's who the beggar woman is, kind of right from the very beginning.
I think that's
still shocking, still tragic by the end of it, of course, but it's like not as like a gut punch of like, oh my God, that's his wife. Like, and I think in part it's because of how they decide to film. Oh my God, there was a Barbara and his wife, where we're literally not just being told by Mrs. Lovett, we're actually seeing Lucy go into that party and being assaulted by the people in attendance. So it's like, oh, we know who Lucy looks like. We know exactly what she looks like. And now that beggar woman looks like Lucy.
And I think that is, it's that translation from stage to screen, because when you're watching it on stage, so much goes on, including the ballads and everything, that you almost forget about the beggar woman character until she suddenly comes back and it's like, oh, it's you. Oh, and then we have the twist. Whereas in the movie, there aren't many characters really that speak. So when she does come back, because she's at the window with Joanna, and we said, there's no kiss me, there's no miss. What a shame.
Right.
Perhaps that is, you could argue that is a problem with the movie, that we do find out too soon. I think of the reveals, it's one of my favorite reveals because it's quite subtle. Whereas, I mean, it's about like Len Cariou's one. He practically, it's like I don't know. It's a very big reaction. He's
oh no!
Whereas in the movie, it's a lot more subtle, which I think also credit to Depp's performance. Him and Carter really play off each other.
That's the thing, though, too. Like with theater performances versus film performances, like you can go big on film, but there's an adverse effect there. Like you can almost become mawkish, or like you're really going overboard here. Where subtle, small things can just have huge impacts because in the filming, you're like right up on someone's face. You're not in the back row watching this on a stage.
I just thought of another change. There are a lot of lyric changes. Not just of lyrics that are cut, but lyric changes in terms of weaving the story. One of the big ones I noticed was Mrs. Lovett says, There were these two, you see, wandered her like mad. In the show, it's one of them a judge, the other one is Beadle. Every day they'd nudge her and they'd wheedle, but she wouldn't budge from her needle. But in the movie, it's there was this judge, you see, wanted her like mad. Every day he'd send her a flower, but she wouldn't budge from her tower. And I think the point of that is that we really focus on the fact that the judge wanted her.
Yes.
Whereas like in the show, it's more kind of these two are conniving, and because the Beadle has a bigger part to play in the show, like a much bigger part. Sure. And I think that, the lyric changes are pretty good on the whole. And even the score kind of, I really listened this time to see if there are any hints of songs that are cut. Like Joanna, the one that the judge sings, I tried to listen to in those scenes to, is there anything in there? But I really don't know. Whereas like in something like in Into the Woods in the movie, no more is cut, but the instrumental of it still remains. And it's a little bit, feels a little bit disjointed. Whereas I think here is a perfect sort of film version of Sweeney Todd that features Sondheim's great instrumental music. He really gets to be Bernard Herrmann here, with a lot of his terrific instrumental music.
I will say that too. Like, we should probably talk about like vocal performances here in a moment.
Oh yes, yeah.
But orchestrally, I think there's some great stuff that's going on in this movie. It makes that score sound so good. Probably because they have a full orchestra that they could have gone to, and it's like, we're gonna pound this out.
And Gemignani and Tunick came back for this, and you can really. And I was listening here with my two big speakers that I have. The full weight of the opening title is just incredible. It's so good. We've even got the little organ at the beginning and stuff. It's the perfect kind of amalgamation of what the ballads are, like what's left. And I think it really works.
So I guess just overall then, we should probably just jump in and say, like, what are your feelings on the movie? If we just wanted to do like a compressed movie review, how would you speak to this movie?
Okay, if I may gush for a second, I love this movie because I was 11 when I first saw it, 10 or 11 when I first saw it. The idea of a musical that was gothic, but unlike something like The Phantom of the Opera, which was another favorite movie of mine, a music that was tense and unique, lyric choices that featured swear words and ideas like cannibalism. I had heard no music like that in a musical before. I'd only really known like a couple Lloyd Webber shows and Wizard of Oz and On the Town and Little Shop at this point, which I love. But I loved this movie. It was a Friday night ritual for me. I would watch it every Friday night after school.
Oh, wow.
I'd act out the scenes. I confess, I made the barber's chair out of cardboard. I made the razors. I had a costume. I was that kid.
Were your parents worried?
I've asked them that many times. Like, were you concerned for me? Because like, here was me walking around singing, they all deserve to die, like with my little honestly. But
your razor held high as you walk into the room.
Exactly. But honestly, I loved it so much. And I was a ride or die for the movie soundtrack for years until I went into a charity shop in about 2017, I think. And I found the original cast recording for £1. And since then, the original has been my go-to. So hearing new songs like the ballads in Kiss Me and Joanna, the judge's version, the cut jokes from A Little Priest, and The Letter, which is maybe my favorite moment in the show that isn't a main song. Most Honorable, Judge Turpin. I love that moment. It's so good. It was like finding missing pages from my favorite book. That's how it felt to listen to the whole thing. And the show's remained in my top 5 musicals ever since. So that's kind of gushing a little bit. But in terms of the film, I think in terms of like Tim Burton's films, at least, it's very maturely directed. I think the camera work is really good, especially in songs like My Friends, where a lesser director might cut away from the moment when he takes out the second razor and he says, "You there, my friend, Mrs. Lovett's like, I'm your friend too, Mr. Todd." And we really focus in, because I know there's that wonderful video of Sondheim explaining how to perform My Friends. And he's like, you're solely focused and it's almost you're hypnotized by these razors. We don't cut away. We just have this really lovely mid shot of Todd and Lovett singing. And I will say as well, Depp and Carter play off each other brilliantly. I don't think that anyone in the show, in the film rather, was badly cast. I think it's a perfectly cast movie.
That's the thing. I think we were even mentioning this before we started recording, is that I do believe there is a difference between just listening to this score versus actually watching it in context with the movie. One, absolutely. Something that I only kind of discovered halfway through the season is how much on just the recorded version, if you get the album version from this movie, they do not include some of the sound effects that are appearing in the movie. When you watch the movie, you see and hear the sound effects.
Yeah.
And in the recorded version, you don't. Like, oh, that actually kind of undercuts how the scene plays. And I hear the criticism of like Helena Bonham Carter's like singing voice, which kind of is fair. I would probably have that same criticism with just listening to the score. But again, in context, I think it does actually work and complements Johnny Depp's voice, I think, pretty well too. Are they belters? Are they as perfect as Len Cariou and Angela Lansbury? Absolutely not. No. But you also don't necessarily need that again in a filmed version of this. You do want kind of the more insular, smaller voices almost, because it's an intimate character study that we're doing here in this adaptation.
The performance, the vocal performance has to match the actual physical performance. Kind of like we were saying about Todd Slaughter. If Depp had walked around and started shouting and cackling and stuff, it just wouldn't have worked. And I think everybody's pretty well served here, especially Sacha Baron Cohen. And I think he's great. He's great. He's wonderful in this. And I think I'd much prefer him here than in Les Mis, in which I think in both of them he's really giving his all, including doing very convincing accents, which always makes me laugh. He's the only person in that movie doing a French accent and everyone's speaking like in a British one. That always makes me laugh. But
right.
But he's so great. And I think him and Todd have some great scenes. Again, that's another kind of song that's really cut down, isn't it? The Contest. But yeah, you're so right about the sound effects. There's pieces of dialogue that are missing. So we have, The Contest finishes and we have that big high note. And then there should be a pause and the winner is Todd. Bum, 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 bum. But instead, that's not there. It's just silence. And then we have that little ending bit. But to go back to the sort of vocal performances, I know from watching the bonus features that Helena Bonham Carter really wanted to do this. She's wanted to, similar to me actually, she wanted to be in Sweeney Todd since she was a kid, which I relate to. I really feel like she's really putting her all into this, especially performance-wise, especially when they're wearing this kind of big, heavy eye, sunken makeup and looking like the Tim Burton aesthetic, She really nails this, including the moment when she lies to Sweeney at the beginning and she says, poisoned herself, arsenic from the apothecary around the corner. You can see her working out, am I going to go forward with this lie? And then she does.
Right, yeah.
And Depp as well, really good. I think they're all brilliant. And of course, Alan Rickman as Judge Turpin, who also, not the best vocals, but they're on pitch, like more or less.
That's right.
Like, they hit it. And I think it's the perfect kind of sound. It's actors who can sing rather than singers who can act.
Exactly.
With Sondheim, that's kind of the great thing about his work is that you don't necessarily have to sing very well, but if you can carry it emotionally, then, it's there.
I'm pretty high on this movie. As far as like me being a Tim Burton fan for like my youth and getting into it, this is probably the last movie that I would consider that he made that was good. I know that's being very mean, but I cannot tell you how much I hated his Alice in Wonderland movie. Like, loathed that movie. But going into this movie, I was like trying to temper my expectations, and I was like so impressed by how they had adapted it. And I actually didn't even know how much it was actually hated within the musical theater community for years. Yeah. So it was pretty good. Like, they kept the majority of the songs, the emotion was there, it was bloody the way that it's supposed to be. I do think that there's I've already kind of said some of the nitpicks of some songs that they've compressed and taking out some lines I wish were still there. I do wish, I guess, the Beatle was brought back up to be as prominent as he is in the stage play. And I think I do wish that Joanna was given a bit more agency rather than just being the object that has to be going and rescued, which some of the stage shows have now been playing around with and giving her a little bit more to do. Yeah. The other big thing is, and this is kind of just the time it was made, it's still in that period of time. And you notice it's mostly in like the opening titles. It is like that early 2000s CGI.
Oh, yeah. It's a little hokey.
I hate it. It's not very good. No. And hasn't held up very well. It's like, this looks like a PS1 video game that I'm watching for a moment, and now we're into the movie. Yeah,
that's the main menu. What is interesting though about that title sequence, and to sort of speak about Burton, the last film that he made, the film he makes before this, is Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Yeah,
with Johnny Depp. Oh, funnily enough, and Helena Bonham Carter. And that film also starts with the place of work of our sort of main character, and things are happening. Food is being made. Mm-hmm. You could argue one is more food than the other, and we have our opening title sequence. It's interesting, and especially visually. Burton's cinematographer. I had two different cinematographers on this. I believe his name is Dariusz Wolski. He works with Ridley Scott a lot.
Mm-hmm.
This was the first film he DP'd for Burton, and I think it really it creates this atmosphere that absolutely sells. I think the performances and the way that the musical is being presented, the sort of visual style here is terrific.
This is what I'll say too. Like, you can definitely notice that, like, there is, I guess, a theatricality to the way that things are staged in this, and the colors and what they're using. But I do think that the actual movie itself looks good.
It does.
My big soapbox I get up onto all the time, and even with directors I like, I don't understand this move into shooting scenes that are basically in darkness, where it's like, I can barely make out what is happening in this scene right now. And it's supposed to, like, I don't know. I've heard the argument it's supposed to evoke like moodiness and like it's the realistic because you're in the darkness. I'm like, yeah, but I can't see anything. So whereas in this, at least I can see everything, even if it's dark and in darkness and in shadow. At least I can see people's faces and understand the emotion and know what's going on. So big plus for that. You were probably a bit too young to know about the marketing to this movie.
Yeah,
I'm guessing.
The research I did really kind of opened my eyes to some things I'd never known before.
Mm-hmm. I vividly remember the trailers for this movie as it was coming out, because it says like Tim Burton, Sweeney Todd, the Sondheim musical. I'm like totally in. I know exactly what this movie's going to be, probably, and it is bonkers. Like, even in like the longer trailer, I think you only hear Johnny Depp sing like a line from Epiphany.
Oh, wow.
That is the only time singing is mentioned in those trailers. It is just visuals. I'm like, boy, some people are going to come into this not knowing this is an actual musical. And when I went on opening night, whenever this opened up in 2007, I was correct, because there were so many people behind me like, this is a musical, like 10 minutes into the movie. Like, it did not tell people that this is what this movie was. And I think maybe part of the somewhat negative reaction by the general public is probably due to that they did not know it was a musical, and the trailers did not tell you that it was. I
guess at that time as well, musicals weren't really as beloved as maybe they are now, in terms of, like, we had our movie musicals at the time, our big ones like, Chicago or...
Chicago had been out for a couple of years, because I was 2002, 2003, somewhere around there.
And like The Producers as well. The questionable Rob Marshall 9 film.
Right.
Which is, that's a movie. But, they weren't really kind of, at least, correct me if I'm wrong, but at least they're not as well regarded as they are now, when you have your Great Showmans, your La La Lands. Suddenly it's like, whoa, a musical. But they really spend the time, to market it, saying, this is a musical. You are going to go see it, and there are going to be songs in it. Whereas from what you said here and from the research I've done, people just didn't know. They genuinely didn't know.
Did not know.
That's crazy.
But it is very easy to watch that trailer and not know that the whole thing is a musical. Definitely you see like a single line that Johnny Depp is singing, but you could easily be like, oh, that's like a dream sequence or something that's happening inside of this one scene. I don't think it very clearly indicated that that's what people were getting into. So I can understand people coming in with like a false sense of what this movie was going to be about. It's also funny too. I remember too watching it in theaters on that first night, and I think almost every kill people laughing at, and
that's great.
Definitely there's some that are supposed to be a little bit jokey here and there, but it's like there's some that aren't, and I was like, I'm very confused about why people are laughing at this moment.
Maybe because I know in one of the documentaries, Sondheim mentions that people sometimes would laugh out of nervous tension, and maybe there is an element of that. But some of the deaths, I think, are, the film treats its gore in a very kind of, it doesn't glorify it, but it really kind of, it revels in the idea of, imagine if you had this much blood coming out of your neck.
Yeah.
And it's terrific. Did anybody walk out by any chance?
Not that I noticed, but we're also talking about, what was that, 15 years ago now at this point?
A while ago.
So I don't remember. But I don't remember people walking out.
Okay. In terms of Burton, sort of his crew, most of some of the regular Burton sort of alumni are here. So we've got costume designer Colleen Atwood, who's amazing. Her costumes for Sleepy Hollow especially, just incredible. Editor Chris Lebenzon as well. I hope I'm saying his name right. It might be Lemenzon. The editor, he's worked with Burton a lot. And of course, Danny Elfman is not here because this Sondheim guy is writing the music and the lyrics. And this would be I believe his second film not scoring for Burton. The previous was Ed Wood. New DP, Dariusz Wolski, doing the cinematography, and paired with Atwood's costumes, they have this really mature style for Burton. It reminds me a lot of the flashback sequences in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, actually, this kind of desaturated feeling, although this much more feels like the faded photographs of Lucy and Joanna that Todd has on his desk, as if we're flipping through these really ancient photographs. Something I noticed in the development of the film, at least, or in the behind the scenes, is there's a lot of green screen in the film, which for some you can't even tell. There's a whole sequence. I think it's when Tim Spall is singing "Ladies and Their Sensitivities," and that wall with the reflecting window, that's not even there. That was just a complete fake.
I mean, the thing about like green screen in any major production that a studio is making, I can guarantee you that there's some touch-ups that are going on.
Yeah.
Even things that you wouldn't necessarily know. There's this great deconstruction of The Wolf of Wall Street, which you wouldn't think is like heavy CGI, but there is one scene that is completely composite where like those two people were not in the same room as each other. That's a completely made up background, and they just put it all together and it looks completely seamless, and you would never know that there's a CGI shot.
That's great.
So I think when done well, we always complain about bad CGI because it stands out, but sometimes it's just so seamless that you don't even realize that is a CG shot that is happening in front of you.
I think for the most part, the blend of practical and CGI, because there are some physical stuff here, like the pie shop was actually there. There were some streets that were there with real horses were there, which is nice. Love real horses. But what's funny is then Burton's next film, Alice in Wonderland, almost completely just green screen. You can and some of it you can really tell, and it's a bit of a shame. But Timothy Spall would come back, Alan Rickman would come back, and Carter and Depp respectively.
I had this recurring joke with my friends at the time and it won't probably happen now since Helena Bonham Carter and Tim Burton have broken up.
Oh yeah.
Part of me wanted it to eventually get to a point where Tim Burton made a film where Helena Bonham Carter portrayed Johnny Depp and Johnny Depp portrayed Helena Bonham Carter. So this thing would be this weird meta analysis of his like longtime collaborators, because I think both of them have shown up in 8 or 9 of his films.
They're in quite a lot of them, yeah.
Yeah, they're in quite a lot.
Yeah, I think that if my memory serves, this is. But Depp has worked with Burton 7 times by the time he does Sweeney Todd. And for Carter, I think, this is her 3rd time, I think. But no, 4th time, because she was in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, this Corpse Bride, which is a great Tim Burton movie, underrated gem. And the critical darling known as the Planet of the Apes movie, which we all know and love.
You know, everyone loves that movie.
Like great movie. Interestingly enough, 6 Degrees of Harry Potter, because this movie is basically Johnny Depp kills the cast of Harry Potter.
It's true. So true.
Apparently, Tim Roth turned down the option to be Snape because he thought that Planet of the Apes would make more money. So he decided to be General Thade instead of Severus Snape. Would have been very interesting. But to go back to the film, let's perhaps we talk a little bit about Sondheim's views on the film.
I was going to say, Sondheim loved this movie.
He did.
As far as like people being upset or thinking like it's a travesty, he himself loved this movie.
He really did. And I think that it's so nice that, the blessing was there. And apparently he had casting approval.
Yeah, I know that specifically he was the most curious about Helena Bonham Carter. So he had her sing for him. He's like, yeah, she can handle it.
Yeah.
Because he, at first thing is like, just because you're in a relationship with the director doesn't mean you should be in this movie. I think that's where he was coming from.
I heard a great story. It's more to do with the show, but it twinged my memory when I watched the movie. I think it was on Broadway Breakdown. I think that I heard it, which is a lovely podcast. Good time.
Yeah. It's always great information. Matt doesn't need a bigger head than he already has.
And I think it was the episode they were discussing Sweeney. Apparently, Angela Lansbury forgot when one of her cues were for Worst Pies in London. So they added in the rolling pin moment for the downbeat so she would know when to come in. So she would say, would you like a pie, sir? Bum, bum, da, 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 da. So she would know when to come in. It just made me go, that's an interesting kind of little bit that perhaps on first watch you're not thinking about. But again, with a lot of Sondheim, first time you watch it can be quite a lot to take in until second time round you go, I didn't notice this little kind of element. One thing I think I should have mentioned earlier to do with the changes, it's at the end when they're looking for Toby And Mrs. Lovett sings, "Toby, where are you, love?" And then Mr. Todd says a little later on, "Nothing to be afraid of, boy," which they cut. Mm-hmm. Instead, we cut to this really great shot of Sweeney taking the razor out and putting it behind his back to show that he's probably going to kill. And I think, again, this translation from stage to screen, there's a lot that has been actually thought about here.
Yes.
And I think it's really good. If you were to include a whole song from the show that doesn't appear in full in the movie, what would it be and why?
This honestly goes into my thing about... This is actually going to lead well into the question I want to ask you, to be honest. I would bring back Ah Miss.
Okay.
And I know that's going to be a bold decision. And the reason why I want that is, again, to show, hey, Joanna actually has some character in her. Because I think maybe not so much in like that pro shot from with Angela Lansbury and George Hearn, or in some of the first few productions that you see. But I've seen newer productions and clips online, and that can be played for so many laughs, and it gives so much character and ingenuity into the Joanna character that it just opens that up and be like, oh, you're not just like this object that everyone's singing about. You're an actual person. So I would bring back Ah Miss, personally. That's a good choice. I think. Do you have a song? I do. I suppose we'll have to come back to it. I would like to mention, I think that Jamie Campbell Bowen, who plays Anthony, is great. And I think I've forgotten her name, who plays Joanna. She's also really good. Again, no bad casting, no notes for the casting. It's brilliant. It's great. It also goes into my thing of why I prefer Toby to be a small kid as well. Absolutely. And you can do that in a film, 100%. Not so easily on stage because of contracts and labor laws. No, those damn labor laws. If I had to pick one song, it would either be Pirelli's Miracle Elixir to flesh out a little bit more of Pirelli's kind of presence in London, or it would be God That's Good. Right. My reasoning for God That's Good is this is the moment in the show, Act 2, we open up and everything's coming up roses for Mrs. Lovett. Right. Well, that's the thing too, is like why I'm not as disappointed for A Little Priest to be compressed. Yes, maybe putting in one or two lines of the ones I like, but still, I think you need to kind of get in and out of A Little Priest pretty quickly. You can flash the title cards like 2 months later or whatever. God That's Good. Like that's the song that's actually more important. I think it to really nail. And I think because again, John Logan does a clever thing. We move the chair sequence and we put it over here, and Sweeney builds the chair, which I have questions about, but sometimes the needs of the plot outweigh the need of the logic. The reason I would bring it back, for one, it's called God That's Good, but nobody ever says it. In the movie, in the movie. Secondly, it would be nice to have a bit more of a public opinion from anyone who's not the main characters, because we only really focus on our main cast. There's no the bustling London town folk, really, which might have been a kind of side effect of getting rid of the ballads. But it would just be nice to have over here, boy, how about some beer? Let me go have some service, like all that stuff, because it would have been such a great sequence, I think. Although watching it, I get why they cut it. It's just that would have been really nice, especially the way Tim Burton uses his camera as well in this. There's a great bit where Toby walks out of the shop to the kind of outside garden area, and then the camera follows up the stairs. And it's just great. They've really thought about it. It just would have been nice. Yeah, it's probably God That's Good. Well, this leads me into my question here then. Like, we have had multiple different versions of the Sweeney Todd story being put onto film. This movie itself is about 15 years old. So do you want to see another adaptation of Sweeney Todd on film? Yes. But only for, and it's a bit of it might be a slightly retired gimmick, and maybe call me out and say I'm wrong. At first I thought, well, it would be nice to see a great duo tackle this. And, if we're lucky, we might even see Josh Groban and Annalee Ashford tackle this, on stage, but really tricky. Because you'd have to pick one human actor. Maybe it would be Mrs. Lovett as the human one, depending on how this would go. Okay, I think I know what you're leading up to, but continue. But a Muppets version of Sweeney Todd would be amazing. Can you imagine? You'd have Fozzie Bear as Pirelli. That would be terrific. We could include all of the unsung Muppets, like Uncle Deadly, who's one of my favorites. You could have Waldorf and Statler in this, and they could, like in the Muppet movie, they could really be the chorus. Honestly, exactly, coming out there. Can you believe this? They could take the piss. It would be so brilliant. And you could have obviously Miss Piggy would play Mrs. Lovett, and she'd be one of the greatest Mrs. Lovetts
you'd ever see.
It would be like Mrs. Piglet or something like
that. It would be Mrs. Piglet. That's so brilliant.
Yeah.
Although obviously, I know that we were going to get an Into the Woods movie that was a Jim Henson related thing.
It kills me that version never got made.
It would have been so good. Been great. Yeah, but so I think a Muppet version of Sweeney Todd would be fantastic. But we absolutely stay true to the rest of it. We don't omit anything. We keep it the kind of dark. We keep the darkness. Maybe I have Scooter as Toby or something. I need to brush up on my Muppet lore. Maybe it'd be somebody else. Yeah. But yeah, the tricky thing would be Kermit. I don't know if no discredit to Kermit the Frog, but I don't know if
he's not really Sweeney.
I don't think he could play Sweeney. Maybe he would play Toby. Or he would appear at the beginning and then he would say, "Attend the tale of Sweeney Todd." But yeah, that would be my go-to. I think it'd be fantastic.
I love that. Before we wrap up here, you have some tinfoil hat theories that you want to go through. I sure
do. Okay. Both of them are not mine, but I think they're just terrific. One of them was mentioned by one of your previous guests. It's the theory that Mrs. Lovett is the one that sent Lucy to the judge in the first place. And she felt that's what she deserved. Great theory. I think it's brilliant. What I think it holds up in the movie, at least. We can continue this theory into the film. In Poor Thing, Mrs. Lovett recalls the story, and we, like Sweeney, see what Mrs. Lovett saw, in air quotes.
Right.
And when the sequence finishes, we even see her take a moment to pause before she says, "Poisoned herself, arsenic from the apothecary around the corner." So it's almost like she lied to Sweeney, and therefore she lied to us, the audience, seeing the sequence. That's one of the theories, and I think it applies here. The second theory, which I saw in a YouTube video recently by a YouTuber I know called Catherine Steele, who's great. She does like Broadway related stuff. It was from a video called Everybody Hates Joanna. The theory is that Joanna is a final girl from sort of 70s, 80s kind of horror movies. The final girl trope is the last girl to survive who usually bests the killer. And if we go by the checklist, she does class as a final girl. She escapes the killer. She is a virgin. Sometimes they have a shared history with the killer. She definitely has a shared history with Sweeney. Yeah. Steele also mentions this term. This is going to be a strange question, but Carl, have you ever heard? Do you know what phallic appropriation is?
Well, we talked about this beforehand, but I'm going to pretend I don't now and say, no, I have no idea what phallic appropriation is.
Gives me a chance to explain it. Oh, God. Okay. It usually refers to a woman or a femme-aligned person using something to sort of best the killer, usually a male killer, using some sort of object like a knife or a gun, which Joanna does. She shoots Mr. Fogg in the asylum. Though she doesn't kill Sweeney, there are interpretations of her killing Sweeney at the end instead of Toby, which I think is cool. Right. She disguises herself as a man, and as Catherine Steele mentions in the video, if that isn't phallic appropriation, I don't know what is. She literally disguises herself as a man. I think it's great. So those are the two theories that really kind of. Though.
I think you could really play around with that. Like if you wanted to be talking about adaptations, if there was a new film adaptation, maybe a non-Muppet one, I personally would want to really play around with that about it being Joanna who does the killing blow at the very end, just to have that through line. The only unfortunate thing there is like, what do you do with Toby at the end? Because he kind of needs to wrap things up, you would think. Or maybe he hands the razor to Joanna and she does the final thing, something like that.
There's a headcanon somewhere, like similarly to I think you asked me this question last time I was here about Joanna and Anthony. Do they really love each other? I think in the movie they do, but maybe we extend that in this version where Joanna kills Sweeney at the end. Maybe Toby goes with Joanna and Anthony and they have a lovely life together in France or whatever. That's the new headcanon, I think. Yeah, those are my I'm taking my tinfoil hat off now, which means I can't hear anybody else's thoughts.
But and I think finally you have a game of some sorts here for me.
I do. It's a small game. If we turn to IMDb, I have here, at least from the version I have, correct me if I'm wrong, blame the internet if I got this wrong, but I have a top 10 of Tim Burton's highest ranked movies.
Rated, yeah, okay.
Yeah, highest rated movies on IMDb from 10 to 1. Sweeney Todd does appear here. I would like you to guess whereabouts does it sit. You get two guesses. Okay.
Well, I'm just going to talk through this first because I am fairly confident like the top 5, I don't know in what order. You're going to have Edward Scissorhands, you're going to have Beetlejuice, you're going to have Ed Wood. I am a big fan of Ed Wood, so I'm going to put that up there. I'm also going to say Pee-wee is probably up there somewhere too.
Okay.
And then that it gets hard because I'm sure, well, Nightmare Before Christmas is not technically a Tim Burton film, so that doesn't count, I'm going to guess.
No, that's not in there. I'll give you that one. That's not
I bet you Big Fish is up in the top 5 too. I bet you anything, because that's pretty beloved. I'm going to guess, and Batman. I can always forget that.
Batman. Oh, yeah, Batman. Yeah, that little
I'm going to guess that Sweeney Todd shows up at number 7.
Oh, you're very close. I gave you 2 guesses. You get one more guess.
Is it 6?
It is 6.
Okay. I was waffling. I was gonna say 6 or 7. It was okay. So it's 6.
From 10 to 1, this is what we have.
Okay.
At number 10, and you won't believe this, Big Eyes.
Really?
Wow. I actually quite like the movie. I think Amy Adams is terrific. Number 9, Batman Returns. The greatest Christmas movie ever made.
Of all time, yeah.
Next to The Muppet Christmas Carol and maybe Hook. Right. Number 8, Corpse Bride.
Okay.
Number 7, Sleepy Hollow.
Mm-hmm.
Number 6, Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street.
And then I'm guessing the top 5 are the ones I already said.
The Pee-wee guess was good, but does not appear at all.
Interesting.
Pee-wee's not here. We've got at number 5, Batman. Number 4, Beetlejuice. Number 3, Ed Wood, which, to be honest, for me should be number 1. Number 2, Edward Scissorhands. And number 1 is Big Fish. That's his highest rated.
Whoa. I would not have guessed Big Fish being the number 1. That is actually shocking. Yeah. Okay.
I think it's enjoyed a new kind of renaissance of love. Because I think it was on Prime for a while and everybody watched it during quarantine. I think that was what happened.
Right.
Edward Scissorhands should not be this high up. It's fine, but Edward's a much better movie and so is Sweeney Todd.
Oh yeah. Edward is... in my opinion, his masterpiece. But that's a conversation for another day.
It absolutely is, and for another time. But yeah, to go back to the film, I suppose, just to kind of close up. In terms of movie musicals, I think it is absolutely one of the best.
Yeah, I think definitely, even if we don't want to bring in like of all time into this, if we rein that into of the 21st century, it definitely is top 3, top 5. I don't know. I'd have to look at my list specifically, but I think it's strong.
Yeah, it'd be in the top 3 at least for me. I think it's just terrific. It accomplishes everything it needs to accomplish. Interestingly enough, there are no added songs. There's no.
They did not try and go after that Oscar.
No, exactly. Yeah, I was heartbroken when Suddenly didn't win the Oscar for Best Original Song for Les Mis. Heartbroken.
Right.
I think it's nice that they were like, because I think didn't Sondheim write a song for Into the Woods that got cut?
Yeah, but it got cut. That was the hilarious thing about that. He wrote a new song and then it was cut from the movie.
It just goes to show, and I said this to my partner as well. We recently saw an amateur production of Sweeney Todd that was set modern day in like a kind of like a crime scene kind of thing with like real meat and stuff. It was brilliant. It was an amateur production, so perhaps it wasn't to whatever kind of high standard, whatever. They did a great job, and it just goes to show that the material is the material, and if you're on the material, then you can't really go wrong. And I think that's what this film ultimately shows, is that it's already good from the beginning. It's got a great story, it's got great music and lyrics, and they really cared and they really thought about it. And I'll be interested to see what the next Sondheim film adaptation is. Obviously, I'll have to wait until I'm like 40 or whatever to see Merrily, but who knows?
It's like, hopefully we don't have to wait until Merrily. There's still that rumor that still has not been proven about them trying to make the Follies film. We'll see if that ever happens. I am still holding out hope. I know I'm the only person. I really think that there's an idea between an animated version of Pacific Overtures out there that would work really well, but that's a pie in the sky.
Overtures.
I'd have to convince Disney to give me $30 million to make that movie. I think there's no world where that exists.
Pacific Overtures would also make a great stop motion film, I think. Maybe give it to like Aardman or somebody. That'd be great. I love Pacific Overtures. That made the top 5 actually of Sondheim, at least for me.
Oh yeah. Someone should try and make an Assassins movie too, but if you want to see people lose their minds in America when a movie is released, make an Assassins movie.
True. Be interested to see like Tarantino or maybe David Fincher approach Assassins. Be quite interesting.
Well, Luke, thank you so much for being here. If people wanted to stay in contact with you, what is the easiest way for them to do so online?
You can follow me on Twitter. I use it every now and then. I'm currently doing a lot of projects at the moment, so I'm unable to kind of really check in socially. But if you do want to follow me, you can follow me at Crichton Music. That's all one word, Crichton Music, on Twitter and on Instagram. If you want to listen to anything I've written, you can go to Spotify and listen to my 2020 self-isolation album called Atoms, which I wrote to help people during the pandemic. But even though the pandemic's over, the music is still there and always will be. So give that a listen if you can. I'd be very grateful.
In fact, maybe what I'll do is I'll use one of those songs to play us out here
that'd be great.
for our episode.
That'd be great.
So people can take a listen to it. Thanks, Luke.
Thank you so much, Carl. Lovely to be here again.
Thanks so much for listening. You can send emails to puttingittogetherpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow Sondheim Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. And you can support the show on Patreon by going to patreon.com/puttingittogetherpodcast. Thank you to the Alberta Podcast Network, to the Alberta Blue Cross, and to the Edmonton Community Foundation this week. Putting It Together is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and pretty much anywhere you can get podcasts from. Consider subscribing so that you never miss an episode. Next week, hopefully, we're going to be talking about the movie Reds, because that is a movie that Sondheim helped to score, and also because he's a Pinko Kami too. As always, a big thanks to the great Chris Taniguchi, who designed the podcast artwork, and Nick Driscoll for composing our theme music. Well, we've reached the end of our episode. Yes, I know. Goodbye for now.